In the last few weeks, many pro-Taiwan groups have raised their voices in Washington, D.C., saying that they are not Chinese. Based on this recognition, they maintain that the passports they carry, and which the Department of State has traditionally recognized as valid travel documents for passing through U.S. customs and immigration procedures, should not indicate that they have Chinese nationality. This kind of speech-making is really stirring up things in Washington. To say that native Taiwanese people are Chinese is a policy which the U.S. executive branch agencies have somehow accepted without question for 50 years or more. Now, at this point in time, are there valid claims for saying that this policy should be subject to a thorough review? What historical analysis, legal data, or other evidence can be collected to support the claims that such a review is needed? Well, to this question, the native Taiwanese have a simple answer. Look at the statements of General Douglas MacArthur. Moreover, General MacArthur wasn't alone in making such remarks. President Harry Truman agreed with him. What about the view of Chinese people about this controversy? Well, those who support the current PRC regime of China in the United Nations have an outlook which is heavily based on traditional Chinese history. That history, of course, goes back thousands of years. In the Chinese view, if the local troops surrender, the territory is annexed. In other words, when speaking about Taiwan, in the Chinese view, the significance of the surrender ceremonies extends to both Japanese forces and Japanese territories. Hence, the Republic of China claims that Taiwan is part of its national territory, and has been since the Japanese surrender ceremonies in Taipei, Taiwan on October 25, 1945. The PRC regards itself as the successor government to the Republic of China, so of course its officials claim that Taiwan is a part of the PRC. Let's examine General Douglas MacArthur's view on all of these matters in more detail. Please watch our short film presentation, which discusses recent Taiwan history and the ongoing controversies involving Taiwan nationality and passport issues.
Harry Truman, Douglas MacArthur, and ROC passports. In many history books in Asia, the date of October 25th is marked as Taiwan Retrocession Day. The authors of these books maintain that this is the day when territorial sovereignty of Taiwan was transferred to China. Based on this so-called Taiwan Retrocession Day concept, the Republic of China regime then announced the mass naturalization of native Taiwanese people as Republic of China citizens on January 12, 1946. Hence, in the Chinese view, all native Taiwanese people are correctly classified as having Chinese nationality. But as Taiwanese activists in Washington, D.C., New York, San Francisco, Dallas, Chicago, St. Louis, Atlanta, Los Angeles, Denver, Honolulu, and other cities are now pointing out, Douglas MacArthur didn't agree with such an interpretation. Neither did President Harry Truman. Hence, these activists say that native Taiwanese people are not Chinese, and they shouldn't be holding Republic of China passports or other ROC identification documents. What were General MacArthur's views on this subject? Well, probably his most famous remark was made at a congressional hearing in May 1951. Now first, we need to put this date into perspective. This was some 5.5 years after the October 25, 1945 Japanese surrender ceremonies in Taipei. In May 1951, MacArthur said that, legally speaking, Taiwan was still a part of Japan. The New York Times printed a report about that congressional hearing in its May 5, 1951 edition, and MacArthur's comments were given a lot of space. Not surprisingly, then, more and more pro-Taiwan activists are now posing pointed questions as to why the Republic of China passport carried by native Taiwanese persons can be considered a valid travel document. More specifically, they charge, the data and other phrasing on these passports contain incorrect and even illegal wording, in direct violation of announced U.S. government policies, U.S. laws, international standards, international treaties, and, of course, in gross violation of the human rights of the native Taiwanese people. But in May 1951, when General MacArthur spoke in that congressional hearing, the post-war San Francisco Peace Treaty had not yet come into effect. The question might be asked, was General MacArthur expressing his own independent views on this subject? Or could it be that he was just going along with the policy of the Truman White House? Let us look back to almost a year previously, to June of 1950, when the Korean War broke out. President Truman had called a press conference on June 27th, and among other things, he announced the placement of the U.S. 7th Fleet in the Taiwan Strait. He further stated that the determination of the future status of Taiwan needed to await a peace settlement with Japan or consideration by the United Nations. Then, in late August of 1950, Harry Truman further clarified his position in written correspondence to Warren Austin, the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations. Truman said that the reason that the Chinese nationalists were in Taiwan was simply because they were asked to go there to handle the surrender of Japanese forces in 1945. But back in the fall of 1945, who directed that the Chinese should go to Taiwan? Of course, the answer is that General MacArthur did. He issued the famous General Order No. 1 on September 2, 1945, the same day that the Japanese representatives signed the Japanese surrender documents aboard the USS Missouri, anchored in Tokyo Bay. What was the content of that general order? Simply speaking, it was a military directive establishing procedures for demobilizing Japanese forces. It authorized the surrender of Japanese forces in different areas. It had nothing to do with the legal disposition of so-called Japanese territories. It was certainly not designed to settle political issues. Later, in reviewing the actions taken by President Truman, spokespersons for the Truman White House continually stressed that if indeed Taiwan had been returned to China in 1945 and therefore was already Chinese territory in 1950, the U.S. would have no legal justification for sending the 7th Fleet into the Taiwan Strait. This is because the Taiwan Strait would be equivalent to an internal sea of China. General MacArthur certainly knew about the actions and statements of President Truman in 1950, but his own analysis goes back even earlier. In the archives of the MacArthur Memorial in Norfolk, Virginia, General MacArthur's views about Formosa are summarized in a December 14, 1949 memorandum for the Secretary of Defense. An important paragraph from this document states,
Formosa remains legally a part of Japan until a treaty of peace. At Potsdam, it was agreed that Japanese areas other than the four main islands should be assigned respectively to certain of the Allies for control until a treaty could be made. Under this plan, Formosa was assigned to China. While it was understood generally that such assignment, like others, was made in the expectation that it would be in accordance with future ownership, until there is a treaty of peace, the nationalist government of China is merely a custodian.
Did this role of custodian change in future years? Looking back at the historical record, the Department of State has been consistent in maintaining that the post-World War II Senate-ratified San Francisco Peace Treaty did not award Taiwan to China. Moreover, a 1959 district court case in Washington, D.C. found that while Taiwan was territory occupied and administered by the government of the Republic of China, Taiwan was not officially recognized as being a part of the Republic of China. Indeed, the Taiwan Relations Act, passed by the U.S. Congress in 1979, also clearly states that the nomenclature of Republic of China is not recognized under U.S. law after January 1, 1979. More significantly, perhaps, a 2008 district court decision in Washington, D.C. found that the native Taiwanese plaintiffs have essentially been persons without a state for almost 60 years. Maybe that is not surprising when we consider that today, on web pages of the Department of State, we can find commentary to the effect that the United States does not recognize the Republic of China as a state or a government. If that is true, isn't that additional proof to show that Taiwanese people holding Republic of China passports are indeed stateless? Our major concern then becomes, with consideration that the Taiwanese Relations Act contains a human rights clause, why aren't executive branch officials and members of Congress holding hearings on this important issue? Or are these officials simply ignoring this issue in an attempt to hide their own secret agenda?
Based on all of the information presented in our short film clip, should native Taiwanese people be carrying passports of the Republic of China? And should the passports they carry identify them as having Chinese nationality? To date, our inquiries for clarifications from the Department of State and the Department of Defense have gone unanswered. But if the Republic of China authorities are not the correct issuing agency for passports for native Taiwanese people, who is? Our associate channel in Key West, Florida, has produced another film clip which explores some of these unanswered questions. According to their research, we need to look at the wars which were fought with the United States and then examine the treaty specifications for occupied Cuba and Taiwan within that context.